The dollar bill was folded into a small, neat square, the way you fold something when you want the gesture to look intentional. Vivian Cross slid it across the leather check holder and tapped it twice with one perfectly shaped fingernail. The sound was small and precise, like a period placed at the end of a sentence designed to end a conversation. "There," she said sweetly. "That should cover your effort." Her three friends laughed. Not the polite kind that people produce when something is mildly amusing. The sharp, deliberate kind that people use when the laughter is the whole point. When the goal was never humor but humiliation, and the laughter is just the final piece of the performance. My hand went still above the table. 2 full hours of service in the private dining room. A custom wine pairing I had coordinated personally with the sommelier because Vivian had sent the first 2 selections back with the single word, inadequate. 3 dishes returned to the kitchen for reasons she had never fully articulated. Every request handled with the complete professionalism that the Halstead Club expected from its dining staff at every service. And now this. Vivian leaned back in her chair and watched my face with the patient, satisfied expression of someone waiting to see whether their work has landed. My cheeks burned. My fingers tightened on the edge of the tray. But something inside me had gone completely, carefully still. One of her friends was holding a phone above the table at the angle people use when they're recording without being obvious about recording. The video, if she posted it, would show a private dining server receiving a single folded dollar from a laughing table of 4 women and standing very still with a professional smile fixed to her face. That was the image Vivian wanted to exist in the world. I kept my smile exactly where it was and removed the check holder from the table. I thanked the table for dining with us. I walked back toward the service corridor with the same pace I used at every table, every service, every evening I had worked at the Halstead Club. I did not look back. In the service corridor, I placed the check holder on the pass and stood for a moment. I thought about how long Vivian had been doing things like this, not just to me, to every server who had the misfortune of being assigned to her table on any given evening. But she had a particular interest in me that had developed over the previous several months into something deliberate and specific. This wasn't random cruelty. This was targeted. The dollar was the escalation of a pattern that had been building since the first night she noticed me across the dining room and decided, for reasons I didn't fully understand at first, that I was the one she wanted to perform for. My name is Callie Mercer. I had been working as a private dining server at the Halstead Club for 3 years when Vivian Cross first walked into my section. The Halstead Club was a specific kind of institution, the kind that had existed in this city for 60 years without ever needing to advertise, because everyone who needed to know about it already did. Private dining rooms with custom menus, executive meeting suites with dedicated service staff, a wine collection that had been curated by the same sommelier for 18 consecutive years. Members paid significant annual dues for access to all of it. And in return, they received the kind of service that anticipated needs before they were expressed and resolved problems before they were noticed. I was good at my job, not in a showy way, in the specific, quiet way that good service actually operates. Remembered member preferences. I managed complex table dynamics without anyone feeling managed. I handled difficult requests with patience and without complaint. The staff respected me. The members who had been assigned to my section for years trusted me. Management had flagged me twice for commendations in my 3 years there. None of this was visible to Vivian Cross when she looked at me across the dining room. She saw a server, and she decided very quickly that a server was something she could use. Vivian was not technically a member of the Halstead Club. Her husband, Bertram Cross, was the member. His corporate membership, one of the club's highest tier, had been active for 11 years. It granted him and his immediate family access to all club facilities, including the private dining rooms, executive lounges, and member event calendar. Vivian used this access freely and frequently. But there is a meaningful difference between someone who has membership access and someone who is a member. Members had agreed to the club's conduct standards personally. They had signed the membership agreement, Their conduct history was formally tracked and attached to their record. Guest access through a membership was different. The member bore some responsibility for their guests' conduct, but the enforcement pathway was more complicated. Vivian understood this distinction, I think, on some level. Not intellectually. I doubt she had ever read the membership agreement fully. But instinctively. She moved through the club with the particular ease of someone who suspects the rules apply to them less directly than they apply to other people, and who has never once been given a compelling reason to believe otherwise. She snapped at servers. She complained about everything that could be complained about. She demanded special arrangements as if they were standard inclusions. And for a long time, the club let her. The first time Vivian specifically noticed me was on a Tuesday evening about 4 months before the dollar incident. I was finishing service at a nearby table when she glanced across the dining room, and her eyes traveled the way eyes travel when something has caught their attention. She looked at my uniform, standard club server attire, clean and pressed. She looked at my face briefly, then her gaze dropped to my shoes. They were flat, practical, black. Exactly what the dress code specified, and exactly what 12 hours of floor service required. "Are those supposed to be professional?" she said. She said it to the woman seated across from her, but at a volume calibrated to reach me clearly. The table laughed. I continued clearing the nearby table with the same pace and expression I would have used regardless of whether anyone was watching. I have been working in private dining long enough to understand that reacting to a comment like that one, in any visible, emotional way, accomplishes nothing except giving the person who made it the response they wanted. I finished clearing the table. I walked to the service corridor. I stood for a moment and breathed. Then I went back out and kept working, but I remembered it. I wrote it down when I got home. The pattern that followed was specific enough to recognize as deliberate after the third or fourth instance. Every visit Vivian made to the club produced some kind of incident. A drink returned as too warm when the temperature had been consistent with every previous service I had provided to that table. A chair described as uncomfortable after I had personally confirmed the room's setup before she arrived. A dish sent back with a complaint about seasoning after the same dish had been served to the same table the previous week without comment. The complaints were always small enough to address without escalation. But they were always directed at me when I was the assigned server. Other servers who encountered her on evenings when I wasn't working had their own stories. But the targeting, the specific escalation, the performance of it, that was reserved for my tables. Management received the complaints through the standard process. Each one was logged, reviewed, and ultimately dismissed as a matter of member-guest preference. The customer service language that private clubs use when they have decided the cost of challenging a high-spending member's behavior is higher than the cost of accommodating it. I understood why management responded that way. I didn't agree with it, but I understood it. What I did instead was begin keeping a personal record. Bertram Cross's annual corporate membership dues were in the high 6 figures. That number moved through the club the way important numbers move through institutions that depend on them. Not openly, not discussed at staff meetings, but present in the background of every decision that touched the Cross account. When Vivian complained about service, the complaint was received with particular attentiveness. When other members mentioned Vivian's behavior to front-of-house management, those conversations were handled gently and concluded without formal documentation. When staff came to management with concerns about specific incidents, the response was measured and the outcome was almost always the same. "We'll monitor the situation." I had heard that phrase 4 times in 3 months. Monitoring without action is not management. It's delay that generates more incidents while giving the institution permission to continue looking away. But I had also learned, in 3 years at the Halstead Club, that institutions like this one move slowly and respond to evidence. Not to staff opinions, not to informal concerns, to documented, organized, time-stamped evidence that makes the cost of inaction clearly higher than the cost of action. So while management monitored the situation, I quietly began building the kind of record that could not be monitored away. I was not the only one. The staff file assembled itself organically over about 8 weeks. I wasn't its only contributor, but I was the one who first suggested organizing it. After a conversation in the break room with 2 other servers and the wine service coordinator, all of whom had their own Vivian stories and had been managing them in isolation, I suggested we write them down. Formally. With dates, times, specific language used, witnesses present, and any available supporting evidence, security footage references, guest complaint records, incident logs. Nobody needed convincing. The coordinator who managed table assignments began maintaining a running log. The senior dining room floor manager added entries when incidents occurred on his watch. The sommelier documented the 3 occasions when wine returns had been accompanied by personal comments directed at staff. Within 6 weeks, the file contained 23 separate entries across 9 staff members. Verbal remarks directed at individual staff members. Guest limit violations. Demands for services outside the scope of her membership tier access. 2 instances of raising her voice in the dining room in ways that disrupted other tables. I added my own entries carefully. Factual, specific, referenced against the standard service protocols that had been met on each occasion. The dollar incident became entry 24. I wrote it up the same night, sitting at my kitchen table. Witnesses. Timeline. Amount. The recording by her companion. My response. Everything documented. I submitted the dollar bill incident report through the formal staff incident reporting system the morning after it occurred. I attached my personal documentation log, the record I had been keeping since the shoe comment 4 months earlier, as a supporting document. I noted in my submission that the incident had been recorded by a guest at the table and that the recording might be verifiable if the video had been posted to any public platform. I included a brief professional note at the end of the submission. It said, I am submitting this report not as a single isolated incident, but as the most recent in a documented pattern of conduct. I respectfully request that this be reviewed in the context of the full incident history and not addressed in isolation. I sent the report at 8:42 in the morning and went to work my lunch shift. I did not expect a rapid response. What I expected was that the submission would be added to a file reviewed at the next scheduled conduct review cycle, and that I would hear something eventually. What I did not expect was that the board's conduct committee had already been conducting a separate review, triggered by the accumulated staff reports that had been filing into the system over the previous 2 months, and that my submission arrived on the morning they were scheduled to meet about it. Sometimes the timing of things is simply what it is. The board's conduct review committee met quarterly, but could convene emergency sessions when circumstances warranted. What had accumulated in the cross-conduct file over the previous 6 months warranted an emergency session. The club's membership director, a methodical woman named Octavia Price, who had been managing membership relations for 9 years, had been quietly compiling everything. Staff incident reports. Security footage references, documentation from the table assignment coordinator. The formal guest complaints from 2 members who had been seated near Vivian during particularly disruptive evenings. Octavia had presented a preliminary summary to the board chair 2 weeks before my dollar bill submission arrived. The board chair had scheduled the emergency session immediately. What the committee needed before it could take formal action was a clear, undeniable, well-documented final incident to anchor the pattern. Something specific enough that the conduct recommendation could be defended against any challenge from Bertram Cross's direction. The dollar bill, with its witnesses, its apparent recording, and the detailed written account I had submitted, was that anchor. Octavia called me into her office 3 days after I submitted the report. She closed the door. She sat across from me and looked at my documentation for a long moment. How long have you been keeping this? She asked. 4 months, I said. She nodded slowly. The board meets next Wednesday, she said. Between my meeting with Octavia and the board's formal session, something happened that I didn't learn about until afterward. Management, specifically the club's general manager, a careful and experienced man named Mr. Osei, had reached out quietly to Bertram Cross, not with the full detail of what the board was reviewing. Just a professional, diplomatic communication indicating that some concerns had been raised about conduct at the club that Bertram should be aware of, and that it would benefit everyone if the club's guest policies were reviewed and observed carefully going forward. Bertram had apparently received the communication with the concerned, cooperative response of someone who genuinely hadn't been aware of the full extent of what his wife had been doing. He had expressed concern. He had promised to address it. He had communicated back to Mr. Osei that the behavior Vivian had exhibited was not something he endorsed and that he appreciated being made aware. He had also, separately, communicated this to Vivian. I learned later that this conversation had not gone well. Vivian's response to being told that the club had raised concerns about her behavior was not introspection or adjustment. It was escalation. She arrived the following week for a reservation she had booked before the communication from Mr. Osei had been sent, and her behavior that evening, documented by 3 staff members and security cameras from 3 separate angles, became the final entry in the conduct file before the board met. The reservation was for a dinner party, 10 guests, which was at the outer edge of what a private dining room at Vivian's access level could accommodate without additional arrangements. She had requested the largest private dining room, a specific wine service protocol that went beyond what was standard for the booking, and a customized menu accommodation that should have been submitted at least 72 hours in advance. It had been submitted 20 minutes before arrival. The kitchen managed it, the dining room staff managed it. I was not the assigned server that evening, but I was the floor supervisor on duty, which meant I was visible on the floor and available to support. Vivian saw me within minutes of being seated. Over the following 2.5 hours, her conduct escalated in a way that was visible, well-witnessed, and fully captured on the dining room's security system. She redirected service instructions away from the assigned server and toward me specifically. Twice. She complained about dish timing in a way that was loud enough to carry to the adjacent dining room. And at approximately 9:40 in the evening, she looked at me in front of her 10 guests and her assigned server and said, "Why is she still hovering? Get someone else. Someone who actually knows what they're doing." The assigned server's hands went still, the table went quiet. 3 separate staff members filed incident reports that evening before the end of their shifts. The board's conduct committee met the following Wednesday morning. I was not present for the full meeting. I was asked to attend briefly at the beginning to respond to 2 specific questions from the committee about my documentation: how I had compiled it, what methods I had used to verify that each entry was accurate, and whether any part of it was based on second-hand accounts rather than direct observation. My answers were clear and specific. The compilation was primary documentation. Every entry I had personally made was based on direct experience. The entries contributed by other staff members were clearly labeled as such and included the contributing staff member's name and their own account of the incident. Nothing had been edited to be more dramatic than the actual events. The committee thanked me and asked me to return to work while they continued their session. I found out the committee's determination the following afternoon through Octavia. Vivian Cross's access to the Halstead Club was suspended pending a formal review. Bertram's membership remained active, but Vivian's guest privileges, her ability to accompany him to the club in any capacity, were suspended immediately, effective upon formal written notification. The notification was sent to Bertram Cross's address of record that afternoon by certified mail. Vivian, according to what I heard later, was not informed immediately. She found out when she arrived at the club the following Thursday and was turned away at the entrance. I wasn't at the entrance when Vivian arrived the Thursday after the suspension. I heard about it from the front desk supervisor, a composed, experienced woman named Iris who had worked the club's entrance for 7 years and had handled difficult situations with remarkable consistency throughout. Vivian had arrived with 2 guests for a dinner reservation she had made before the suspension was issued. Iris had greeted her professionally and explained that a review was underway that temporarily suspended her access as a guest of the membership. Vivian had asked to speak with management. Mr. Osei had come to the entrance and confirmed what Iris had said, clearly and without drama. Vivian had not accepted this calmly. The conversation had lasted about 12 minutes and had been observed by approximately 4 members in the lobby. Vivian had, at various points, cited her husband's membership contribution, questioned the authority of the person she was speaking with, demanded to see documentation of the suspension, and stated that this would have significant consequences for several people by name, including me. Mr. Osei had responded to each statement professionally. He had provided the formal written notification she had apparently not yet seen. He had confirmed that the suspension was based on a board conduct review and was in accordance with the membership agreement's guest conduct provisions. He had offered to facilitate communication with the board review committee through the formal appeal process. Vivian had left without her dinner reservation. The formal complaint against me arrived in Octavia's office 3 days after the entrance incident. It was detailed and specific, typed, not handwritten, which suggested someone had spent time on it. It alleged that I had deliberately targeted Vivian Cross through a campaign of documented misrepresentation, that I had conspired with other staff members to falsify conduct reports, and that my motivation was personal retaliation for an ordinary service disagreement. The dollar bill was not mentioned in the complaint. I thought that was interesting. Octavia reviewed it carefully. She called me into her office and walked me through each allegation specifically. I addressed each one with the same factual precision I had applied to the original documentation. I pointed to the specific incident reports contributed by staff members who had no working relationship with me and no knowledge of each other's submissions. I pointed to the security footage references that confirmed several of the entries independently of any staff account. I pointed to the timeline, the fact that my personal documentation had begun 4 months before the suspension decision, long before there was any formal process that could have motivated a falsification campaign. Octavia listened to all of it. She looked at her desk for a moment. "The complaint will be reviewed formally," she said. "That's the process. But I want you to know that what you submitted is the clearest, most thorough staff documentation I have received in 9 years here." She closed the folder. "Management already has the full history." The formal complaint review concluded 10 days after Octavia received it. The committee reviewed the full evidence package, the original documentation file, the security footage from the dinner party evening, the 3 staff incident reports filed that night, and Vivian's formal complaint. They found no basis for the allegations of falsification or targeted misrepresentation. Every incident in the documentation file was supported by at least one independent source beyond my personal record. The security footage was consistent with the staff accounts in every specific detail that could be verified visually. The complaint was dismissed, and the board's original conduct determination was upheld. Vivian's access suspension remained in effect. What happened next was determined by a provision in the membership agreement that very few people, including Vivian, had ever read carefully. Section 19.4 of the agreement, titled Guest Reinstatement After Conduct Review, stated that any guest whose access had been suspended following a formal board conduct review was subject to a reinstatement process requiring board approval. This process included a formal reinstatement application, a review period of no less than 30 days, and, for guests classified as high risk under the conduct policy's risk tiering system, a reinstatement fee intended to demonstrate commitment to future compliance with club standards. The high-risk classification was triggered automatically by conduct that had required a formal board review. Vivian's conduct had required a formal board review. The fee was $50,000. The reinstatement fee was not my invention. It had existed in the membership agreement for 11 years, written into the governance framework by the board, at a time when a guest conduct situation had caused the club significant operational and reputational difficulty. And the board had decided that a financial threshold for reinstatement of high-risk access would serve as both a deterrent and a demonstration of genuine intent to comply. In 11 years, the fee had been invoked twice. Both times the individuals involved had declined to pay and had simply not returned to the club. The fee was known to the board, to Octavia's department, and to the membership services team. It was not widely known to guests because guests rarely read membership agreements carefully, and the provision was deep in the document. Bertram Cross had signed that agreement on behalf of his household access when he joined 11 years ago. Around the time the complaint review concluded, management promoted me, not to general management immediately, to membership compliance manager, a role that had been open for several months following the previous holder's retirement. The role was responsible for managing the conduct review process, coordinating with the board committee, and administering enforcement actions, including access restrictions and reinstatement proceedings. The promotion was effective immediately. My first case in the new role was the one that had just concluded. Vivian arrived at the club on a Thursday afternoon demanding reinstatement. I was in a coordination meeting with Octavia when Iris called from the front desk to say that Vivian Cross was in the lobby, requesting to speak with whoever was handling her case. Octavia looked at me briefly. "That's you now," she said. I closed my notebook. I walked to the small member meeting room off the main lobby, the one used for sensitive member conversations that required privacy but needed to be close to the front desk. I asked Iris to let Vivian know I would meet with her there. I sat down at the meeting table. I placed the reinstatement policy documentation on my side of the table. I placed a printed copy of Section 19.4 beside it. I placed the reinstatement application form, the standard document used for the process, on top. Then I folded my hands and waited. I heard her in the lobby before she appeared. Her voice, the specific cadence of someone who has been telling themselves a story about a situation for several days and has arrived ready to perform their version of it. The door opened. She saw me. The expression that moved across Vivian's face when she saw me was one of the more complicated things I have ever witnessed on a person. First, recognition. The same neural click I had seen on Miranda Vale's face in the Sterling Club story I had heard from a colleague years earlier. The face matching the stored memory, then the context assembling itself, then the assessment, rapid, visible in the movement of her eyes, of what my presence here in this room meant, why I was seated on this side of the table, what I was holding in front of me. "You," she said. Her voice carried the particular flatness of someone whose prepared script has just been rendered unusable by unexpected information. I kept my expression professionally neutral. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Cross," I said. "I'm Callie Mercer, Membership Compliance Manager. I've been assigned to your reinstatement inquiry." She stood in the doorway for a moment longer than felt entirely comfortable. Then she came in. She sat down across from me with the controlled, careful posture of someone deciding in real time how to recalibrate. "I want my access reinstated," she said. "I've been a guest here for 4 years, and I've never had a formal complaint filed against me before this." "The board's conduct review produced a formal determination," I said. "I'd like to walk you through the reinstatement process." I slid the documentation across the table. "Of course, she wasn't carrying a tray this time," I said. I smiled professionally. "Let's go through the details." The reinstatement application form was 4 pages. It required a formal acknowledgement of the conduct findings, a written statement of commitment to future compliance with the club's guest standards, references from 2 current club members willing to sponsor the reinstatement, and on page 3, clearly formatted with a bold line above and below it, the reinstatement fee for high-risk classification. $50,000, payable to the Halstead Club at the time of application submission. Non-refundable upon board review, regardless of outcome. I watched Vivian's eyes move down the page. I watched them stop. I watched them move back up to confirm what they had just read. Then she looked at me. $50,000, she said. "That's the fee for reinstatement from a high-risk conduct suspension," I said. "The classification is automatic following a board formal review per Section 19.4. I can show you the full text if you'd like to review it." She was quiet for a long moment. "This is your doing," she said. Her voice was controlled. "Just barely." "The fee has existed in the membership agreement for 11 years, I said. "It was established by the board in 2014. You're the one processing this." "I'm administering the standard reinstatement process," I said. the same process that would apply to any guest in this classification. She looked at the application form. Then she looked at me. I want to be precise about what happened in that meeting room because I've thought about it many times since. Vivian Cross sat across from me with the reinstatement form in front of her, and I watched her arrive at the specific understanding that the woman she had spent 4 months using as a performance prop, the server she had insulted about her shoes, the staff member she had redirected guests away from in front of a full dining room, the person she had left a single folded dollar for in a leather check holder while her friend filmed the moment, was now the person determining the terms under which she could return to the club she had treated as her social stage. That realization moved through her expression clearly. It was not a satisfying moment to witness in the way that satisfying moments are sometimes described. It was something more complicated than satisfaction. It was the quiet, specific feeling of a situation having arrived at accuracy. Things are what they are. People have the roles they have. The woman with the professional smile and the practical shoes had spent 3 years earning a position and 4 months documenting a pattern, and both of those things had produced exactly this moment. I kept my expression professional. I asked if she had any questions about the application process. She said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "I need to speak with my husband." The meeting ended without a decision. Vivian took the application form with her. She thanked me in the tight, controlled voice of someone who has decided that courtesy is strategically superior to confrontation in this particular moment, though the effort of producing it is visible. She left. I returned to my office. I wrote a brief summary note of the meeting, the time, the attendee, the information provided, the outcome, and filed it in the case record. Then I sat for a while. I thought about the dollar bill, still sitting in the incident file, as a documented entry, with witnesses and a written account. I thought about the first comment about my shoes, which I had written down on a Tuesday night 4 months ago, in the practical black flats that had prompted it. I thought about the word that gets used for the kind of work that people like me do. The quiet kind. The careful kind. The kind that doesn't make noise and doesn't seek acknowledgement and just keeps doing the job correctly until the job produces something real. The word people use is usually just work. But there's another word for it. The word is preparation. Every entry in that documentation file had been an act of preparation for a moment I hadn't known was coming. The promotion had been preparation. The accuracy had been preparation. The 3 years of building trust in this institution had been preparation. And preparation, when the moment finally arrives, looks like power. Bertram Cross called Mr. Osei 2 days after Vivian's meeting with me. The call was professional and measured. Bertram asked about the reinstatement process, confirmed his understanding of the fee structure, and asked whether there was any mechanism for appealing the high-risk classification itself. Mr. Osei confirmed that the classification was automatic and tied directly to the formal board review process, which had been conducted in accordance with the membership agreement. He confirmed that the appeal process outlined in the agreement allowed for review of the underlying conduct findings, but that the classification criteria were not subject to appeal independently. Bertram asked about the timeline if Vivian chose to proceed with the application. Mr. Osei walked him through the 30-day review period. Bertram thanked him and ended the call. I was informed of the call's content by Mr. Osei in a brief Friday afternoon summary meeting. "He's considering it," Mr. Osei said. I nodded. He mentioned, Mr. Osei continued, glancing at his notes, that Vivian was very unhappy about the person assigned to process her case. I looked at him steadily. "Is that something the club needs to address?" I asked. Mr. Osei looked at his notes for a moment. Then he looked at me. "No," he said, "it's not." Vivian did not submit the reinstatement application. The 30-day consideration window, which began from the date of our meeting, expired without a submission, which meant her access remained revoked, not suspended with a path back. Revoked by the default expiration of the reinstatement window, the outcome the policy produced when an applicant chose not to proceed. Bertram Cross retained his full membership. He continued dining at the club. On the occasions when he brought guests, those guests were registered through the standard process and were not Vivian. The social circle Vivian had built around the club, the Thursday evening dinners, the private dining room bookings she had used for her events, the access to the specific rooms and specific people that the Halstead Club provided to those inside it, contracted immediately and significantly. The club was not the only place those relationships existed, but it was the one where she had spent 4 years performing the version of herself she most wanted people to see. Without that stage, some things simply became less convenient to maintain. I heard, through the ordinary information flow of a club where everyone knew everyone, that she had been seen at 2 other private dining establishments in the city. Both were perfectly good institutions. Neither was the Halstead Club. Several months after the reinstatement window expired, the board formalized my role. Membership Compliance Manager became a permanent position with its own budget, reporting line, and formal charter. The board had decided, following the Cross situation and the process improvements it had revealed, that compliance management deserved dedicated institutional attention, rather than being absorbed into the general operations function. I was asked to draft the charter. I spent 2 weeks on it. I thought about the 11 entries in the staff file that had existed before my submission. About Octavia's careful, patient work over 9 years. About Iris at the front desk and Otto in the bar and the table assignment coordinator, who had all been managing the same situation in isolation because the institution hadn't given them a structure to manage it together. The charter I wrote was about structure, about making the documentation process easier to access and more consistent in its standards, about training front-of-house staff to recognize conduct patterns early, about the formal incident report template that would make staff submissions clearer and more defensible, and about the conduct review timeline, making sure that a pattern like the one Vivian Cross had built over 4 months could be identified and addressed in 4 weeks. I still think about the dollar bill sometimes. It was folded into a small, neat square and placed into a leather check holder by someone who believed the gap between us was so wide and so permanent that the gesture was entirely safe. She was looking at the wrong thing. She was looking at the tray I was carrying. She should have been looking at the notebook in my bag. Because the night Vivian Cross tried to humiliate me with $1 was the night she started building exactly the case that would eventually cost her $50,000, just to ask for her seat back. Respect costs a great deal more than that.